All right, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? All right, a new year, new discourse, fresh bagels. I want to remind everybody about a couple of things. Oh, I stapled this backwards. Nunu. Um, Next Sunday, we have Torah dedication at 1 o'clock. Brand new Torah, the Bernie Marcus Torah. Everybody's invited. Bring the kids. It's going to be a great, unique celebration. November 4th, we begin the new JLI series, 6-week course, the Kabbalah of Meaning. It's a great course. It'll be offered Tuesday evenings and at 7:30 to 9 p.m. and Wednesdays from 11 a.m. until 12:30. It's also a good time to join the Scholars Society. You get a $500 voucher to go to Israel, and it's going to be a great trip. Okay, let's do it. So this week, this coming Shabbos, this coming Shabbat, beginning today, we begin to study the second of the Torah portions, known as Noach. Noach is the story of the world in chaos. Does it sound familiar? So the world, at the end of the last week's Torah portion, yesterday we read, interesting enough, the chaos is called Hamas. The Torah calls it Hamas. The world was filled with Hamas. Hamas literally translates in Hebrew as violence. I think Hamas, the terrorist organization, is an acronym for something else. But in Hebrew, Hamas means violence. And the Torah tells us that the world was filled with violence. Specifically, the violence is about thievery. So the world, after 10 generations, had gotten out of control. And God said, since the inclination of man is evil, we got to get rid of this project. And Noach, who was righteous, the Torah tells us the opening of the portion that Noach was righteous. So God said, we're going to save you. So Noach and his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, Shem, Ham, and Yafes, are saved through this act of instruction to build an ark. And Noach builds this ark, and then the flood begins, and all of humanity is wiped out. The water covers the entire earth. It says that in the creation story, we read how God separated the waters. The Midrash tells us that God took the waters and he placed them in the heavens. In Hebrew, heaven is, anybody knows, how do we say heaven in Hebrew? Shamayim. Shamayim is 2 words, Sham Mayim. There is water. Heavens are made up of water. God took the waters and put them into the heavens and put a plug on it. And then God took the water from the earth and he put it into the center of the earth and he put a plug on it. And except for the oceans, of course, the Torah tells us that God opened up the plugs and everything came out and washed away all of mankind. At the end of the flood, Noach opens the ark and he sends out the raven. Then he sends out the dove. The dove comes back with a piece of an olive branch. And then he sends out the dove a second time. The dove does not return. Noach now knows that the earth has dried up. He opens the ark, and God gives them instruction to repopulate the earth. God also says that since the inclination of man is evil from his youth, he will never again bring a flood. And as a sign for that, he places the rainbow in the sky. So the very same argument to bring the flood is now the argument to remove the flood. That's our story. Now, every story in the Torah has its literal details, and then it also has the spiritual meaning behind it. So what we're going to be studying is what is the spiritual meaning behind the story of Noach and the flood. What's going on here, okay? And it's very fundamental to life, to our story, and the journey of the human being. Page 4. This discourse begins with a verse from Song of Songs that says as follows: Mayim Rabim, many waters, la yuchlu lechabes es ha'ava, cannot extinguish the love that the soul has for Hashem. La yuchlu lechabes es ha'ava, unahares la yishtafua, and the rivers cannot drown it. In other words, even if there be a flood, even if there be many waters, the soul of man remains in love with God. Nothing can ultimately wash away that love. The verse continues, Imiten ishas kol hain beisai ba'ava. If a person were to give all the wealth of his house in exchange for this love, baiz yavaizulai, people would ridicule him, because no wealth can equal this love. The love transcends all wealth. There's nothing ultimately you can give for this love. So what are these many waters that King Solomon is talking about in Song of Songs? Hine Mayim Rabim, Heim Kol Tirdos HaParnasa VaHaMachshava Shebenyana Lamazeh. So all of us probably, on some level, experienced these many waters last week. What are the many waters? So I'll give you a whole series of them. They're kids. Kids are many waters. They're a lot of work. Very overwhelming. They're exhausting. Making a living is many waters. It's overwhelming to try to take care of your family and pay your bills. Many waters is taking care of your house. A hole in the roof, a leaky faucet. Many waters is the inner turmoil that each of us experience from our childhood, from the complexities of life, from our relationships, trying to figure out how to navigate all of these things. So all of these things are many waters. But primarily in this discourse, we're going to focus on the many waters being what's known in Hebrew as tirdos haparnasa, which means the burden of livelihood. Probably not because it excludes any of the others, but because the livelihood is really something that consumes everybody. So much of our life, if we think about it, even if we are blessed with children and they are a lot of work, we sleep. Maimonides says one should sleep 8 hours a night. I don't know how many of us get 8 hours of sleep a night, but that's Maimonides' prescribed recommendation for number of hours of sleep. So if we follow Maimonides' prescription, we get 8 hours of sleep. If you pray 3 times a day, you probably chalk up about another hour to that. Maybe chalk up another hour, hour and a half to exercise and eating. And what is the rest of the day spent on? It's spent on making a living. And by the way, making a living doesn't only mean if you're scraping the bucket to pay your bills. Even if you have plenty of money, you're also making a living. There are plenty of very, very wealthy people who are consumed with their money. They're consumed with not just making the money, but how do you spend it? How do you manage it? Right? So there's a lot that goes into dealing with money and livelihood. So these many waters, these overwhelming experiences are likened to many waters that can overwhelm us. Think about it. How much time do we spend doing the things that are truly meaningful for us in life? How many of us spend the majority, the bulk, even half of our day involved in things that are meaningful to us? We do a lot of things to find the time to do the things that are meaningful. Go ahead. Good. I also work for a nonprofit, and I can tell you that even in nonprofit, if you think about how much time is spent doing the objective of the nonprofit. In other words, there's an infrastructure that is required to support the nonprofit. Where I might say a profession that's a meaningful profession that the person actually spends the bulk of their day doing something meaningful are educators, where they'll spend a good chunk of the hours of their working time actually teaching. Doctors, right? They're actually working and healing people. So maybe there are a few exclusions to the rule. But for the most part, wonderful nonprofits like the one you work for, the one I work for, we spend a lot of time dealing with stuff. We deal with a lot of packaging and a lot of marketing and a lot of external stuff. But even there, even if you were to say that the bulk of your time is spent doing the meaningful stuff, it's still, in the scheme of a 24-hour period, in the scheme of a 7-day work week, we're still not spending the bulk of our time there. And there's a lot of frustration in the work that we're doing, even if it's meaningful. And that frustration, in whatever these areas might be, is what King Solomon refers to when he says, Mayim Rabim, these many waters. He says they are the worries about a livelihood and the thoughts regarding physical matter. Notwithstanding that there are these many waters, they cannot extinguish the love. They cannot extinguish the love that is known as the ahava mesuteres. The ahava mesuteres is the concealed love, or as the Alter Rebbe writes in the book of Tanya, the inherited love. We all receive an inheritance from our forefather Abraham, that each of us possesses inherently within us a love for God. And even though we don't get to exercise that love very often, and not only don't we get to exercise it, there are times where we may even wonder whether we still have that love, right? Sometimes, one of the things that I didn't realize in the moment, but I try to convey this to younger people today, is that when you're raising children, relationships flourish at the beginning, and relationships flourish, I don't want to say at the end, but when the kids move out, right? There was that old joke, when does life begin? When the kids move out and the dog dies, right? Or when the kids graduate college, something like that. But the point is that the love in a relationship can die. In a relationship, it can die when we're in the throes of making a living and raising children. It really can die if it's not nurtured. So the love needs to be nurtured. And it can be nurtured. Maybe not as passionately and as actively when a relationship starts or when the kids move out, but it can be nurtured. But it can also die, because human love is human love. And it will dissipate if it's not nurtured and not watered and flourished, nurtured. But our love for God can never be extinguished, because it's deep within us, it's inherent within us, and this, no matter how much it may feel that love is extinguished, the love is there. By the way, we experienced this 2 years ago on October 7th. Many Jews, not just Jews who are, perhaps unaffiliated, but Jews who, we've heard this from many different, TV personalities and well-known people who really didn't identify Jewishly at all, as a result of October 7th, became very proud Jews and were very outspoken about their Judaism. So where did that come from? Because the love never died. No matter what happens to a person, the love never dies. Because the nature of that love is to constantly yearn for a connection with God, like a fire rises upwards by nature. Maimonides tells us, in the very beginning of his magnum opus, the Yad HaChazaka, Maimonides talks about, there's some very interesting chapters. Maimonides talks about creation and the structure of creation, and he talks about the elements. And he tells us that the element of fire, the root element of fire, lives under the sun. And the Kabbalists tell us that one of the reasons why fire moves upwards is because fire is trying to go back to its source. The nature of all things is it wants to go back to its source. And the only reason why fire does not go back to its source is because it has a fuel and a wick to hold it in place. But when the fuel and wick cease, the fire leaves. Where does the fire go? It goes back to its element, back to its source element, which is the source of fire underneath the sun. The soul even if you try to cover it up, even if circumstances try to cover it up, it never stops yearning for divine connection. It's always striving upwards. As King Solomon says earlier in Song of Songs, its flames, the flames of the soul, are flaming fires with a fiery love for Hashem, which is a gift that God gives each of us, that each of us possesses this love for God that is constantly yearning for connection. Shehi hanefesh halukis, this is the godly soul, shekoidim islapshusa begufa gashmi, hoisenenes miziv ashchina, hoisemyuchedes betachlas hayichud bein seif baruch hu, prior to it being enclosed within a body, it was deriving pleasure from the radiance of the Shechina, of the divine presence, and it was unified there in total unity. So it's important to contextualize the nature of the human condition, which we've touched upon in different discourses, but it's always good to have a reminder. We are not one being. We are not one soul. There's a very interesting discussion in the book of Tanya. So Tanya is known as the book of the Beinoni, book of the intermediary, or the book of the ordinary person. And the premise of Tanya is a very simple one, very profound, but very simple. And that is that you have righteous people who don't possess an evil inclination, and therefore everything that's in their consciousness is constantly unified. It's aligned with the soul and wants only divine connection. Right? There's no other consciousness. So everything about the righteous is in the service of God. And then you have the opposite extreme, the wicked, which basically everything is in the self-interest. So even the spiritual, it's classic narcissism, right? Everything that exists is only in the service of me. And then you have the ordinary person. And the Alter Rebbe tells us that the ordinary person, which is a level that all of us can strive for, is that we are made up of body and soul, or an animal soul and a godly soul. The animal soul is not bad, it's just self-interested, and everything that it sees is in the interest of self. So food, relationships, even spirituality is in the interest of self. And then there's the godly soul, which is entire interest of the godly soul is in the interest of service to God. And these two souls live inside of us. They live inside of us. And because they live inside of us, we have this inner tension. So the Alter Rebbe tells us, and he has a prescription for the Beinoni, for this person who is living, who's striving to live a godly life, but has the pull of the body. One of the interesting things he says is that when a person prays, in the moment of prayer, that's the domain of the godly soul. And the godly soul, when it's praying, takes over the consciousness of the body. Right? We're coming from the high holiday season, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, even the joy of Simchas Torah. That's a soul experience. And when you're in a soul experience, you feel love for God, because that's the nature of the soul. But the Alter Rebbe says when the prayers are over and the Beinoni goes about his business, suddenly finds that he's faced with temptations. And the Beinoni is apt to say that my love during prayer was fake. It wasn't authentic. And the proof of it is that I suddenly have temptations again. So the Alter Rebbe says, rest assured, if you were only one soul, then it would make sense that you have this dilemma that you experienced God, and now suddenly you're experiencing something else. So it must be that your love and prayer was fake. And maybe it would be fake if you only had one soul. But because we have two souls, it could be that during prayer, our soul is activated and it's expressing its love for God. And when prayer is over and the soul retreats, the body soul, the animal soul, takes over. The end game is that the inspiration that we have from our prayers should be able to influence the animal soul, that it shouldn't run away. What's the expression? Will run riot or something like that. That the animal soul shouldn't run away with the desires, but it should remain anchored and good morning, nice to see you, should be influenced by the godly soul to anchor it. And the Alter Rebbe, again, a lot of Tanya is focused on that. How do we influence the godly soul, the animal soul, to want to love God, even if it's its own interests? But the main point I'm trying to bring out is this idea that we are not only one soul. We have two souls. And because we have two souls, it is possible that we can, in one moment, be completely preoccupied with self, and in another moment, experience the soul's love for God. And therefore, even if as time goes by, you could actually pray every day and still not feel the soul. Because even when you're praying, you can be preoccupied with work, and you could be preoccupied with your to-do list and so on and so forth. And a person might say, I've lost the love. The love is gone. We've drifted apart. The relationship is dead. We're being reassured that the soul's love for God never dies. Because the soul comes, before it comes into the body, it is unified with God. It lives in the radiance of the divine presence of the Shekhinah. So even when it comes into the body, it never loses that connection. Even when it's enclosed in the body and, in a sense, overwhelmed by the body, the love always remains there. And again, not a perfect parallel, but in that relationship that's going through a challenging time because of all the distractions of life, oftentimes just a date night can bring the relationship back to life. A bouquet of flowers can bring the relationship back to life, right? Just some time apart can bring the relationship back to life, because as long as the love is still there, it can be nurtured. The flame of the love can be fanned and brought back to life. So for sure, the love that the soul has, which can never be extinguished, can be brought back to life, even if it's overwhelmed by the circumstances of the body and the challenges of life. Yes.
The other soul is functioning before actively do something. Whenever the soul functions on its own automatic pilot. What's being created there?
Yeah. That's the programming. It's not a bug, it's a feature. It's very important what you're saying, because we can become despondent. It's easy to become despondent from the fact that, sometimes we get tired of dealing with the body. We really do. By the way, plug for the course, the Kabbalah of Meaning, is actually about how do we recover meaning in our lives? Because this is the programming. The programming is that God put the soul in a body so that the body will hide the soul, that the body will overwhelm the soul, that the circumstances will overwhelm the soul, as we're going to learn in this discourse, so that we can then uncover the deep love that the soul has, which we wouldn't have if the soul never entered into a body. If it never faced these challenges, if it never faced seemingly the dominance of the body, we would never be able to strive to uncover the deep love that the soul has. So this is the nature of creation. Good? Bottom of page 5. V'lezois, and therefore, since the soul is a part of God, and it was unified with God, and it basked in the divine radiance before it came into the body, so gamacher slapshusa begufa gashmi, even after it comes into the physical body, lasik binyanim megashmiyim, to be engaged in material matters, shehena nekroim mayim rabim, those are the things that we call many waters. Im kozeh lo yuchlu lechaboisa miliyis tamid bebechinas ava v'tshuka nifla lales v'likola l'mayla. Nonetheless, it cannot become extinguished from continuing to have this profound and yearning love, this wondrous yearning love, to strive to go upwards and connect with its source. Va'adarabba, and to the point we just made, through its being clothed in the many waters hanal that were mentioned above, it can attain the highest of levels, even higher than even at the level it was before it came into the body, as we will explain shortly. So this is the core of the discourse is that there are many waters. These are the material distractions that exist in our lives. One can think that the many waters can extinguish the love of the soul, but indeed it cannot. The love of the soul is always there. And the purpose of all of these many waters is in order to help the soul uncover its deep love and to bring it to a level even higher than the soul had, the love even higher than the level of the love that the soul had before it came into a body. Middle of page 6. The aforementioned many waters, this is what's called the waters of Noach. Like it says in Yeshaya and Isaiah, Asher nishbaiti me'aver me'noach oid ala aretz, ke nishbaiti miktzayf alayach u'migarbach. God says, just like I have sworn never again to bring the great flood, which is the waters of Noach, so too I swear never to become angry again and to rebuke the Jewish people. And this is a prophecy regarding the Messianic era, that when Mashiach comes, God will never again become angry at us. But the emphasis here is that the many waters are known as the waters of Noach. They're attributed to Noach. Why does Noach get this seemingly bad rap, that all of this struggle is named Noach waters, right? Because remember, Noach was the righteous one. The other people were the bad ones. Noach was the righteous one. And yet what we're saying is that all of this darkness, all of this challenge is attributed to Noach. And poor guy is complaining, like, why did you name this stuff after me? Name it after the bad people. So he says, so what does the word Noach mean? The word Noach itself comes from the word nach. Nach means to rest. Shabbos is called Yom Manoach, a day of rest. Yom Shabbos Manoach, the day of the Sabbath, a day of rest. Noach means to rest. Which means that Noach causes the spirit to rest. Shu b'china shvisa, ka'adam hashovis mimlachte, like a person who rests from their work. What happens when a person is engaged in output, right? Resting doesn't mean sleeping. It could mean sleeping, but resting is when you're engaged in output, you say, I need a break. I need a rest. What's happening when you're resting? You're going back to your spirit. You're going back to your core, right? Somebody finishes running a marathon, they rest. What are they doing when they finish the marathon? They're bringing all of this outputted energy, they're bringing it back to its source. When we rest in the space of mindfulness, it's encouraged to take breaks, to rest. Why? Because when you're engaged in output, you're not thinking, you're just doing. And when you take a break and you take a rest, you're going back, why am I engaged in this in the first place? In all of these many waters, when we get overwhelmed, we tell this to the children, take a breath, take a break, right? What's going on? We've lost the anchoring in the purpose that we got into this in the first place. So work can become disconnected. It really can. It can become disconnected from purpose when we just engage in output. We work, and we never say, what was this all about? It seems to be about the money, but it's not about the money. It's about providing for our families. It's about living a healthy, normal life. So all of the output needs an opportunity to rest. So that's what Noach is. Noach is resting of the spirit, bringing the spirit back to its core. Like it says regarding Shabbos, Vayishbois bayem hashvi. God created for 6 days. And what did God do on the seventh day? He rests. What does that mean that God rested? V'targumai, the translation, the Aramaic translation of Onkelos translates the words, and he rested on the seventh day, V'nach b'yom hashviyah, and he rested on the seventh day. What does it mean that he rested? It means that God went back, so to speak, to his purpose in creation, which, by the way, is why we are instructed to observe the Sabbath. Observing the Shabbos is our opportunity to remember why it is that we have 6 days of the week. Because if all we had was 7 days of work, we'd never stop to say, what is this all about? And we just engage in output, output, output. So we have a day of rest, which allows for us to go back to our purpose, to recharge ourselves, to remember why it is that we work, and then we work again. And then at the end of that work, we rest. And in that act of resting on the Shabbos, we're taking all of the output of the prior week and we are bringing it back to its source. God does the same thing. And because Shabbos is a day that God is resting, that's why it's a time that we don't work. It's not that God is resting, so he's telling us not to work. It's a direct result. I'm sorry? No, God doesn't get tired. It says, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. So it's precisely what we're explaining here. If God doesn't get tired, so what's he resting about? God is going back to the purpose. He's going back to his core purpose in creation in the first place. Right? Sometimes, by the way, when you pause in middle of engaging in output, you're not resting in the sense like you're getting you're re-energizing yourself because your body's tired. You're refocusing. That's what we're doing. We're going back to the core of who we are in the first place. When you take a breath, you don't get sleep off of that. If you're busy with your kids, by the way, you can rest for a second and be energized. If you're busy with the tumult of life, you're busy with your kids, and any parent knows this, your kids are screaming at each other, they're fighting and they're driving you crazy, and you're beginning to lose it. You don't need to go into a meditative state to remind yourself that you had these kids for a reason. It's a second of saying, okay, they're kids, I remember, they're precious gifts. Okay, I'm going to anchor myself so that I can focus. Sometimes you do need a vacation, but oftentimes it's just a moment to recognize. You're engaged in work and somebody's getting on your nerves, or a deal is going sour and you're beginning to lose your anchoring. All you need to do is take a moment to say, what is this all about in the first place? And oftentimes just getting ourselves back to that anchoring puts us back in focus and allows for us to deal with the circumstances in a much more functional and healthy way. So that's what God is doing on Shabbos. God is resting. And because God is resting, the world is not in an outputted state. It's in a reflective state. And that's why we observe the Shabbos. Oftentimes, people see the Torah's prohibitions as very restrictive. But it's like, in a sense, it's like closing your curtains and turning the light off so that you could be inward focused. It's turning off the phone so you can be inward focused. It's not restrictive. If I want to connect with myself, if I want to connect with my core, I need to be able to shut out the world. So on Shabbos, the world is shut out because God is not engaged in output. We have to enter into that experience, which is what Shabbos is about. So when we can be plugged in to our essence, then our relationship with everything around us becomes synchronized, becomes aligned. Everybody is making sense? Everybody resting? Good. At the beginning of the portion, it says, Eila toldos Noach ish tzaddik. These are the offspring of Noach. Noach was a righteous man. The Torah could have said, these are the offspring of Noach, who was a righteous man. Why does it say these are the offspring of Noach? Noach was a righteous man. It says Noach twice. So the Alter Rebbe tells us that the reason why it says Noach twice is because it refers to two types of rest. It's the rest of those above and the rest of those below. Shehu Shabbos Tata, Shu B'china Shabbos Tata v'Shabbos Eilah. It's the lower Sabbath and it's the upper Sabbath. Sheyiyah la'asid, which will be in the Messianic era, shenikra Yom Shekule Shabbos, which is called a day that is all Shabbos. Mash enkein Shabbos Tata einay kule Shabbos kasha yizbar, which is not the case with the Shabbos, the lower Shabbos, the Shabbos as it is now. The lower Shabbos that is now is not a day that is all Shabbos, as we're going to explain. Let's give the general idea here. Let's read footnote 12 for a second on page 7. It says the simple meaning of this phrase from the Midrash, which comes to explain the repetition of Noach's name twice, is that Noach brought rest to those above, to the angels, and to those below, the people on earth. This is because until Noach came, the angels complained to God for creating man who was so wicked. But when Noach came and was spared for his righteousness, they ceased complaining. They rested from complaining. It was also for rest for people, since now humanity can rest at ease, knowing that there will never be a flood again to destroy all mankind after this flood. But now the Alter Rebbe is explaining it on a deeper level. So on a basic level, it quieted the angels and it quieted the earth. But on a spiritual level, we're talking about two types of Shabbos. There's an upper Shabbos, which is defined by a day that is all rest. And there's the lower Shabbos, which is not all rest. What does that mean? So hold the question. We're going to come back to it a little later. Seemingly, the whole flood is not understood. If the objective of the flood was simply to remove, to eradicate the evildoers, why was there need to be such a tumult? Why did it need to be such an event? In one moment, God could have wiped out all of humanity and spared Noach and his children. Even without a flood. It seems like a very creative kind of way to eliminate everybody. Got to build an ark, then you got to bring a flood, and you drown everybody except for God. Like this can cause everybody to disappear. Everybody can die. Whatever the program would have been, they could have all disappeared. Why did you need this elaborate event of a flood? In truth, however, the flood came to purify the earth. Now you see it on the page right here. For the earth was filled with chamas, with violence, and had become very damaged, very corrupted. The earth needed purification. And that's why specifically there was a flood. Because a flood, hu bechinas Mayim, that is water, in order to purify those that are impure, which is like a mikvah, which is made up of 40 sa'ah. Sa'ah is a measurement of water, approximately 90 gallons, which is to purify the impure. So we have, in Jewish practice, something known as a mikvah. A mikvah is a body of natural water, rainwater, spring water, that is collected in a single place. And the mikvah is used to purify those that are impure. In one context, people come in contact with the dead, people who've had different types of diseases like the biblical tsaras, the biblical leprosy. The mikvah is also a tool to purify in a transition. So a convert goes to the mikvah in a transition from being non-Jewish to being Jewish. We also have a mikvah when a woman finishes her period, when she's most apt to become pregnant. A woman goes to the mikvah. It's a transition from a state of not being able to conceive to being able to conceive. So so purify can have a negative connotation, right? So that's why I said there's two elements. There's purifying from impurity, and there's purifying as an elevation. right? It's like when you're about to undertake a new endeavor, you prepare yourself. You might say you purify yourself, you clear your mind, you get yourself ready, and so on. So because there's a transitional stage, it's interesting because when a person goes into the mikvah, they actually have to be absolutely clean. In any time a person goes to the mikvah, they have to be absolutely clean. You go completely naked without any clothing. There's no barriers. You're not allowed to have any makeups, no jewelry, no bandages. It's quite complex because we're not cleaning a person up from being dirty. We're moving a person from one state into another. So in the case of impurity, that's a state where the person is not permitted to enter into the place of the temple. In the case of a conversion or a woman who's finishing her period, this is a transitional state, a state of elevation. Parenthetically, I'll tell you a very interesting story. What's his name? Bob Zimmerman, right? Is that Bob Dylan's? No, Robert Zimmerman, right? Robert Zimmerman is Bob Dylan. So Bob Dylan, once upon a time, many years ago, became a born-again Christian. At least he adopted the persona of being a born-again Christian. And then through his Chabad rabbis, he came back to Judaism. Rabbi Manis Friedman from St. Paul, Minneapolis, was one of Bob Dylan's rabbis, and he brought him to the Rebbe. And he came to the Rebbe at a Farbrengen, one of the gatherings that the Rebbe would teach and sing, and the practice at a Farbrengen was you'd get a little cup with a little bit of wine, and you'd raise it up to the Rebbe. You could be in a room with thousands of people. We were talking about this on Sukkot, and the Rebbe had this ability to see you across the room and acknowledge your l'chaim. But you can hold the cup up, and the Rebbe could look at you and keep on moving and not acknowledge your l'chaim. So you knew when the Rebbe acknowledged your l'chaim, and you can see videos of people holding up the cup, and they're holding, and then the Rebbe, then they say l'chaim, and then they drink it. So Bob Dylan was at this Farbrengen, and you can be sure he was the only guy in the room with a leather jacket and wraparound sunglasses. And he holds out his l'chaim to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe looks at him and doesn't acknowledge his l'chaim. And the Rebbe looks at him and doesn't acknowledge his l'chaim. And this is going on. The l'chaims were offered in between the Rebbe's talks. And if Farbrengen could go on 3, 4, 5 hours, there could be 5 or 6 or 10 songs that are sung in between the Rebbe's talks. And over again, the Rebbe looks at him but doesn't acknowledge his l'chaim. So when the Farbrengen was over, he was frustrated. He turned to Rabbi Friedman and he says, I know the Rebbe saw me and he didn't acknowledge my l'chaim. So Rabbi Friedman said, I don't know what to say, but I can tell you this. It's brought down in the books. It's not obligatory. A Jew can never abandon their Jewishness. It's the reality. Because as we're talking here, when you have a soul, your soul is for the journey of life. No matter how much a person sins, no matter how much a person turns away from God, the soul always remains Jewish. You can't shed that. But it is brought down that when a person converts out of the faith, even though they're still Jewish, but it's appropriate for them to go to a mikvah as an act of conversion. So he says, my suggestion is you should go to the mikvah. So he went to the mikvah. Bob Dylan went to the mikvah. And the next morning, when the Rebbe came for services, Bob Dylan was standing there, and the Rebbe sees him, and the Rebbe like, hello, like as if he hadn't seen him before. Where have you been? So I heard this story from Rabbi Friedman many years ago, and he said, a tzaddik, the righteous, don't see what can't be seen. They don't see what they shouldn't see. And here's a person whose soul was so essentially concealed that it wasn't visible. So once he went to the mikvah, the soul came out, became clarified. Rebbe was able to see him. It's important to note that for the most part, the only mikvah that is done today is actually the transitional mikvah. The mikvah for conversion and the mikvah for a woman after her period. The other mikvahs are not done anymore because we can't achieve a state of purity as they did in the times of the temple, because it's assumed that everybody the one can the impurity of death is very easily contractable. Sounds like a disease, but it's easily passed, right? So if you've been to a funeral, you were within 4 cubits of a deceased person, you have the impurity of death. And so you might go to the mikveh, but the other person who's standing next to you didn't, and therefore you immediately become impure. So we don't practice mikveh for those purposes. There is a tradition that men, especially in Hasidic circles, will go to a mikveh on a daily basis as an act of purification, like an act of elevation. Many people have a practice to go to the mikveh before Yom Kippur, but it's not. You don't come out of the mikveh and you're now like allowed to go into the temple. Which, by the way, impurity of death is also only removed through the very unique mitzvah of having the waters of the red heifer, of the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled on a person. And we don't have that today either. So my point being is that this idea of being purified from impurity is not really a practice today. Most of the practice of mikveh today is really an act of higher purity. Yes?
Where do they get the water now? Because my daughter and my granddaughter went to that mikveh.
So a kosher mikveh is made up of the way a kosher mikveh is made is they create a body of water, like a bathtub or a more bigger than a bathtub, and then underneath it is another compartment, and those 2 compartments are connected through an opening, and some people put that other compartment on the side. Some mikvahs have both of them. It's connected through this opening, so the waters don't actually mix into each other, but they remain connected. And the waters that go in there are rainwater, which has to be brought down. The water can never be captured in a receptacle. So you can't put a big bucket out and then bring that bucket into the mikvah. The water has to come into those compartments, never having landed in a receptacle. So what they do is they make, typically what will happen is it'll come off the roof of the building where the water gathers, and then they have like a gutter, and the gutter will bring the water in, and then it's met by another gutter without any. The water never stops. It comes in, it flows until it goes into the mikvah, and then that water remains there. It remains there for tens of years. Sometimes you can collect snow. If you're in a snowy area, you can collect snow not with a shovel, but with like a receptacle that's porous, and then it has to go into a crate that's porous, and then that crate goes into that compartment, and then the water melts. So there's a lot of different ways. But the point is that the water, the base water is natural water, rainwater or snow water that comes from heaven. But again, so let's bring it back here. All of this discussion about a mikvah, the requirement of the size of that compartment, a kosher mikvah has 40 sa. Sa is a Talmudic measurement. 40 sa of this rainwater, corresponding to the 40 sa of rainwater, which then purifies. We have that the flood was. It fell for 40 days and 40 nights, corresponding to those 40 measures of rainwater, to the 40 measures of a mikvah. So the purpose of the flood wasn't just to eradicate the people; it was to purify the earth, like a mikvah. The whole earth went into a mikvah, became purified. So to the flood came in order to purify all of the earth, like the prophet says, that I will pour upon you pure water, and you will become purified. So we see that there's an act of purification that requires water. By the way, in the morning, when we wake up in the morning, our Kabbalah tells us that when we sleep, our soul leaves our body. And when our soul leaves our body, the negative, the spirits of impurity can come into our body. But as soon as the soul comes back, they have to leave. But those negative forces remain on the nails. because the nails have very little life in them, right? You can cut your nails, it doesn't hurt. So they stay on the nails. And that's why in the morning, to ritually purify ourselves from this impurity, we wash our hands. We wash once on the right, once on the left, once on the 3 times each. Different than we wash for bread. And with bread, we wash 3 times and consecutively. When we wash in the morning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. By the way, when we come back from a cemetery, we also wash like that. These are all acts of purifying ourselves to remove the impurity that might remain on the fingertips. That's a side part, but the main point I'm trying to bring out of that is that water is a critical function in the act of purification. So because, and like the prophet says, and I will pour upon you water and you will become purified, the waters of the flood were necessary in order to purify the earth. Okay, so for the aforementioned reasons, that's why the flood waters were called the waters of Noah. We just switched it around from being this negative water, which is designed to punish people, to seeing these waters as a tool for purification, causing a resting of the spirit. Now what we're going to do is, once we understand that in the context of the flood, that the waters of Noah were there to purify the earth of its impurity, now we can draw it back to the analog in terms of the waters of Noah being the challenges that we face. That they're not there to torture us, they're not there to torment us. The struggles of life are not there to make our lives miserable. The challenges of life are designed like the waters of Noah to purify us. Not to purify us in the sense that we're impure and we need purification, but to purify us in the sense to elevate us. As we mentioned earlier, that as a result of the challenges that we face, it brings out a love for God that the soul didn't even have before it came into the body. Does this make sense? I must be doing such a great job explaining.
I have a question. Does something become...
Thank you. Now I know there's work to be done. Yes.
Something becomes unholy. Is that because there's a void of Hashem in it? Or is it because the spirit just goes back to get recharged and come back?
Great question. Great question. So, the state of impurity is a state of deep concealment. That's what the state of impurity is. When a person is impure, the reason why the impurity of death is the most powerful of all impurities is because when a person is dead, they never get life back. So when a person is alive, even if they have some kind of impurity that they can pass to another, ultimately they can restore themselves through becoming purified from that impurity. So even if that person were to come in contact with another person, the impurity is of a type that even though there's a negative effect, but it doesn't require this intense kind of purification like one who's come in contact with the dead, which tells us that impurity is a state of concealment. It's a state where the holiness is so removed, it's so hidden from the container that's holding it, that the container doesn't recognize its holiness. Using the Bob Dylan story again, his soul was there. It never left. But what essentially the Kabbalists are telling us is that when a person converts out of the faith, their soul goes into such a state of concealment, such a state of hiding, that it needs to be brought back out. Whereas somebody else who does a sin, they don't need to go to a mikveh. Because as soon as they do teshuvah, as soon as they recognize what is teshuvah, teshuvah is a returning to self. As soon as the person recognizes, no, I'm not that person. I am a soul. I have that soul within me. I can let that light shine again. Everything gets put back into place. When Mashiach comes, it says that the spirit of impurity will be removed from the earth. That's an automatic process. It's not like impurity goes somewhere. The impurity automatically becomes revealed for what it is. somewhat similar to the conversation we had some time ago in an earlier class about the power of evil, right? Evil is just the concealment of the divine light. And that's why as soon as, in the case of the Exodus from Egypt, as soon as God revealed himself, Pharaoh was no longer able to resist. The most evil of people, this dictator who murdered people, right? As soon as, and resisted letting the Jewish people go for hundreds of years, as soon as the divine presence revealed itself, he crumbled. There was nothing left there.
What about the upper Shabbat and lower Shabbat before you end?
So we're going to learn, we'll have to get it later in the discourse, but essentially the upper Shabbos is a day that's all Shabbos, meaning the transformation is complete. Whereas now, when we eliminate the impurity, it's a temporary state because we can always go back into it. Shabbos is only one day a week by design, just like the body is dominated by the human experience is dominated by the body, because our job right now is to deal with the floodwaters. It's to deal with the challenges. It's to deal with the body. It's to deal with the negativity in the world and try to refine it and try to overcome it. So even when we take a rest, even when we take a Shabbos, the transformation is not complete, which is one of the reasons why Saturday night, when we make the Havdalah, we smell the spices. We're giving the soul encouragement. The soul suddenly found itself in Shabbos, right? A whole week, it's an afterthought. Suddenly Shabbos, it's the whole focus. We tell the soul, don't worry. There's actually a beautiful song that's sung on Saturday night. We say, Al tira avdi Yaakov. Don't be afraid, my servant Jacob. Don't be afraid of the week ahead of you, because God is with you. And we'll come back to Shabbos. All right, that's